Welcome to the PowerPoint on Truth and Interpretation. For this PowerPoint, you are going to need your journal and also the worksheet packet of notes that you received in class. The very first thing that we are going to do is a journal, so make sure that you have your journal handy. This journal is going to be called the Truth Journal. So please title it as such and write down the date that you are filling this in. For this truth journal, please define the word truth. Write down one thing you know is true and how you know it's true. And then answer the question, is the Bible true? Please explain this answer. Please pause this video while you answer these questions. Welcome back. Please keep in mind your answers to these journal questions as we go through the rest of this PowerPoint presentation. At this point, you're going to need to have the packet of incomplete notes with you, which you'll want to fill in as we go along. The first thing that we need to keep in mind when attempting to define the word truth is that there are many different definitions of truth and many different kinds of truth. So first, we must define these types of truth. The first type of truth is historical, and these are facts concerning what, when, why, how, and to whom events happened. This is an objective type of truth, which we'll discuss in a moment. An example of this is the fact that Ignatius died on July 31st, 1556. This is a historical fact that we are able to look up and to verify. The second type of truth is scientific. These are facts about how the universe works. This is also an objective type of truth, which means there's something similar between historical and scientific truth. An example of scientific truth is gravity. Do me a favor and take your pen or pencil, hold it out, and now let it go. It fell to the ground, right? Or to the table, or to whatever the lowest thing is around you. That is an example of gravity. The next type of truth is relational. Relational truth is describing the experience of the relationships between people. This is a subjective type of truth, which means it's somehow different from historical and scientific. An example of relational truth is I love you. More on that in a moment. Another type of truth is religious truth. And religious truth is a person's relationship with and understanding of the divine. With religious truth, one must go deeper than the surface level in a story and look between the lines and through the symbols in order to see the religious truth. This is also an example of subjective truth, which means there's something similar between religious and relational truth that is also different from historical and scientific truth. An example of religious truth is Jesus died to save us from sin and give us everlasting life. More on that in a moment. There are also many other types of truth, and we're going to talk about those in a few minutes, but I'd like to just start with these four. The reason I want to start with these four is because they do a really great job of illustrating the differences between objective expressions of truth and subjective expressions of truth. Objective expressions of truth can change as new information is discovered, but they are the same for everyone. These are historical and scientific explanations of truth. So the example here would be like Columbus. Everyone at the time believed that the world was flat until he discovered the world was round. And when he realized that, that changed for everyone. And he found that out experientially, but other people were able to repeat that same experience of sailing around the world to prove that same fact. Subjective expressions of truth may be different for different people. So it's not a matter of opinion, like ninjas are better than pirates, or pirates are better than ninjas. But this is something a person believes with all their being that is true, something that a person is willing to die for. So again, this is not just opinion, but just because one person holds this to be true does not mean that the next person will. And if one person changes a subjective expression of truth, it does not automatically mean that the next person will. For example, our relational truth was, I love you. So first of all, how do we prove that? How do you prove to someone love or faith? Well, lots of different ways, but people might disagree on what exactly is proof of love. People might say specific actions, but they might disagree on which action proves love. Furthermore, in a particular couple, one person might love the other, but that feeling might not be returned because it is a subjective expression of truth. With religion, we see that when one person converts to a particular religion or to a deeper understanding of that religion, for example, Ignatius, it does not automatically mean that everyone else also converts to that religion or deeper understanding. Again, this is not opinion, but it doesn't change for everyone at the same time. Now, as I mentioned, different types of truth have different kinds of proof, and different cultures and societies place different emphasis on different expressions of truth. So today, in America, historical and scientific truth is most important. When people say prove it, they want a source that you can verify, or an experiment that you can prove. Basically, scientific or historical types of proof. Well, back when the Bible was written, relational and religious truth was most important. So when they were asked to prove it, their answer would be, who told you? A relational type of proof. Or, what was your experience of God? A religious type of proof. So just like we've moved from an oral to a print culture, and that influences how we interpret the Bible today, the same way we have to move past our focus on historical and scientific truth and proof, back to a relational religious type of truth and proof when we study Scripture. So remember, when we read Scripture, a statement can be true in more than one way. It is possible for it to be both historically true and religiously true. But a statement can also be true in one way and not another. So something can be religiously true, but not scientifically true. Thus, the Bible is 100% religiously true, because it tells us how the people who wrote it understood and experienced God, our definition of religious truth. And it does contain some historical and scientific truth, but it also contains many inaccuracies in these areas as well, since that's not the main goal of the Bible. Now let us turn to the second page in your packet, entitled, Is the Bible True? This is going to show us a few more types of truth, as well as expand on the ones we've already looked at. We've already talked about the first one, religious truth. So let's move to moral truth. Moral truth tells us what is right and wrong, basically how we should live our life. It's a type of morality. But we will see some morality stays the same throughout the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, and some of it changes. For example, we're going to see that Jesus will alter the moral idea of an eye for an eye, proportional punishment, something that is celebrated in the Old Testament, but not the New. But Jesus is going to reaffirm care for the poor, widows, and orphans, something that is seen as a moral truth throughout Scripture. So moral truth is how to live our life, what is right and what is wrong. Symbolic truth is truth that we find in the Bible, but that we have to interpret because it's found in symbols, parables, myths, and allegories. Things that we have to decipher before we can understand it. For example, in a story we've already read about Adam and Eve, we can see that the story there is not about apples and snakes, but rather is a deeper story about the relationship between God and humanity and how we were created. Proverbial truth is wisdom literature, kind of folksy truths contained in small sayings like, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you," or "A stitch in time saves 9. Luckily, you'll find most of this in the book of Proverbs, which is pretty handy. And then we've also already talked about historical and scientific truth. But two things that I'd like to point out here. Underneath historical truth, I think it's very important to note that the biblical authors were not interested so much in history itself, but how the events of the past could be seen in relation to their faith. So this influences how their history is recorded. They're not trying to write things down in an accurate portrayal of historical events. They are trying to explain how they saw God acting in their history. So if that is their goal, they're going to be less focused on how they can accurately present events and more focused on making sure that the reader sees how God was involved in the events, even if that means bending how things happened a little bit in order to reach that goal. And finally, when we talk about scientific truth, I want to take a moment to talk about the worldview image that you saw with the first story of creation in Scripture, the priestly version. Obviously, this is not scientifically accurate. This was the world as it was understood by the human authors based on their limited cultural understanding of the time. We see things like the waters above the dome because when they experienced the world, they saw that the sky was blue, just like water is blue, and sometimes water came from the sky. So based on their observations of the natural world, they assumed, well, if the sky is blue, like water is blue, and sometimes water comes from the sky, there must be water above the dome of the sky. But since that water doesn't fall on us all the time, there must be these floodgates that are sometimes opened and sometimes closed to explain why it's not raining all the time. This is just one example of the people just trying to explain how they observed the world around them. Is it scientifically true? No. But is it an example of them trying to better understand their world and their relationship to each other and God? Well, it's not directly related to that, so it doesn't really fully matter that it's incorrect scientifically, but it is interesting to see how they are trying to connect the world around them, which is a religious truth, believing that that is important. Finally, if you turn to the very last page, you'll see the last topic of today, interpretation. Interpretation is the explanation of the meaning of something. And there are two types of interpretation. Literal interpretation believes that every word in the Bible is believed to be 100% true in all ways, exactly as stated. No outside sources are necessary to understand the Bible. Contextual interpretation believes that other information is used to understand the meaning of the Bible, including Jewish culture and writing styles, historical events, and language. The Bible is believed to be 100% religiously true, but not necessarily true in other ways. Allow me to give some examples. The statement, "It's raining cats and dogs." A literal interpretation would be that cats and dogs are falling out of the sky. A contextual interpretation would research that statement and the context around it to determine it's raining very hard. Take a look at the comic at the bottom of the page and see if you can interpret it literally and contextually.